So as she mentioned, my name is Adriana White. I am a middle school librarian, and before that, I also worked as a special education teacher. So I've been in the education field for like 9 years now or so. I also am a writer, and I've been writing like all my life, like short stories as a kid, fan fiction in middle school, all the usual stuff. I also write freelance essays for like websites and things like that. And most recently, a couple of years ago, I started writing picture books. And for me, the biggest leap forward toward getting publishing was actually participating in something called the PB Chat Mentorship Program. And it's put on by a Puerto Rican author named Justin Colon. And it is this great opportunity where aspiring authors get paired with a published author, and they kind of walk us through everything we need to do to get published. And we get to talk to agents and editors, and it's this wonderful program that I think is fantastic, especially for neurodivergent authors who may not quite know how to break into the field. So right now I've got a bunch of manuscripts that I'm sending out to agents and just trying to see if I can find that exact right person for me and my stories, and hopefully you'll be seeing my books on bookshelves in a few years.
Yay, yes, I hope so. I mean, I'm looking forward to that. And maybe if we have time later, you can give us a peek into a preview of what books might be. But can you tell us a little bit more about what it's like for you? You mentioned like maybe like special challenges or how it might be different for a neurodivergent author. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I know it's something that in talking to other autistic authors, those that have been published and those who are still working toward getting published, there can be a lot of uncertainty. I think for anyone, there's a lot of uncertainty about how publishing works, how you get an agent, how you get a publisher. And I think for autistic people, a lot of us feel this additional anxiety because there's so much that we have to figure out, and there's so many places where we could get it wrong. And I do appreciate that it's been a conversation that's been coming up on like social media. I believe there's an author named Eric Smith from PS Literary who has put together a great little highlight of different tips for agents to work with autistic and neurodivergent authors to make it easier for us to get our work to them. And there are also some agents who are themselves neurodivergent. Naomi Davis at Bookends is wonderful. She has ADHD and she has signed a bunch of autistic authors. And I think it's wonderful that agents like Eric and Naomi are sharing these tips for how agents can make it easier for autistic authors to connect with them, that maybe we need an email instead of filling out this giant form on Query Manager that can be like super overwhelming for us. And you know, it's also important for agents to think about what an autistic character might be like and how that might differ than what they're used to, you know, from what they're used to reading. Sometimes, you know, whether it's a picture book or a novel, an agent might read it and be like, this character doesn't sound right. And, you know, it could be because we're writing, you know, from our own autistic experiences. So it's definitely something that I haven't personally encountered too much yet, thank goodness, but I know other people have had a lot of barriers and challenges in their publishing journey, and figuring out how to overcome those is super important so we can get more autistic authors out there.
Interesting. Well, that's great. That seems like there's more awareness of it now and more people trying to kind of overcome those barriers. And you have talked about, like you said, how important it is to have more of these children's books available with autistic characters, especially more diverse books. Can you talk some more about that? I know you've talked in particular about the need for have more Latinx autistic characters in children's books, but why is that so important, and why do you think we haven't seen that very much? That's a big question.
Yeah, that is. It's such a big question. I could do like a whole presentation just on that. But I think to boil it down, we are starting to see more autistic authors. You know, when I started teaching, you know, almost 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of books written by autistic people. Now we're starting to see a lot of them. Most of them are written by white women, and you don't get to see as many people of color in publishing spaces for autistic stories. And I think that's something that's really important because speaking from someone who is from a Mexican and Puerto Rican background, my parents didn't have a lot of understanding of what autism was. We were
Right.
kind of a few steps behind the mainstream understanding of autism. And so for my parents, it took a long time for us to figure out basically why I was different. And I feel that if we had had access to more stories with more diverse representations, I think it would be easier for families to look at these kinds of books and recognize something within them that, oh, yeah, that totally reminds me of my cousin, or that's totally like my kid, or that's me. And that can help kind of just move things along in terms of diagnoses. A lot of people of color, we lag behind. Other, white and Asian, I think, are the most frequently diagnosed populations when it comes to autism. So there's a lot of work to be done for Black and Latinx and Indigenous people for us to get diagnosed and get what we need. And I think having more stories that show people what autism looks like across different cultures would definitely help get that awareness out there.
Definitely. And then for those that were watching, if you haven't visited Adriana's website, I really recommend it. She has a lot of information. That was really eye-opening for me. To be honest, I hadn't thought about it that much. And reading your article and talking about like the difficulties in diagnosis and awareness, it is really fascinating. She's like she said, she's written a lot of freelance articles. So I recommend that and her TED Talk, of course. And speaking of that, in your articles, in your TED Talk, you are a very vocal supporter of children's books about autism, neurodiversity, disability, mental health. What is it that you hope that people understand from these books? I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit about how it really does help with diagnosis, because when people see these characters, then maybe that helps them kind of recognize what's going on. What do you hope for neurodiverse kids that are reading, or just for any other kids that are reading? What do you hope that they get out of those kinds of books?
Wow. I guess to put them in those two camps, I hope that kids who are not autistic will read these kinds of books and understand their peers a little bit better and know how to communicate with them and not make fun of them for being a little bit different. And I hope for autistic kids, they can read more books with autistic characters written by autistic authors and recognize that the way their mind works is totally like a normal part of the human diversity of our
Right,
brains, that we are different, and it doesn't mean that you're broken, which was the point of my TED Talk.
right,
And a lot of the books that were written about autism in the past were very much like catered to like siblings of autistic kids, or they were about very like didactic, here's how you can go and have a conversation, like very like
right.
social story type stories. And I think autistic kids deserve to have just, these great adventure books or
Fun book.
stories about them, solving a mystery, like, yeah, we should have all these fun books as well, because kids definitely deserve to see themselves in the starring roles of those kinds of stories too. And that's my hope, is that we'll get to see more of those and people will buy them and not think, oh, I don't have any autistic kids, I don't have to buy these books. Like, no, like it should be something everyone gets to read so we can understand each other a bit better. So that's
Yeah.
my dream, is that they get to have those starring roles.
Yeah, I think that that's wonderful. And I think sometimes we can leave it out of the conversation when we talk about diversity in children's books, and we think about culture and race, and we don't necessarily think about neurodiversity. So I love that you're bringing awareness to this. Um,
Mhm.
and speaking about the importance of children's books, you said that you actually weren't diagnosed with autism until you were an adult. And part of how you
Mhm.
discovered it was through your work as a special ed teacher. So not just, I mean, we talked about recognizing yourself in children's books, but also you were observing how your autistic students were interacting with books and the kinds of
Yes,
books
yeah.
they liked and how they read them, and that led to you seeing similarities. Can you talk some more about that? Because that was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. With autistic kids, I feel like there's a lot of things that they do with books that aren't necessarily talked about when you're becoming like a special education teacher. It may be something that people haven't really noticed or done research on. But from working with autistic kids in elementary and middle schools, I noticed that you'll see a lot of the same things. The two biggest things is that autistic kids like to read the same book over and over again. It's like
Right.
a comforting thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to like come back to these characters that you know and the story that you know, and they get this joy out of, finally getting to the end and getting to this great resolution that they knew was coming, but it's still just as exciting the second time around. And additionally, autistic kids also like to read like informational texts. So not just like the Guinness Book of World Record, which a lot of kids like reading those kinds of books, but I've had kids who like read encyclopedias and read dictionaries. And for me, I was like, oh, that's weird. I used to read the encyclopedia as a kid, and my mom just thought I was really smart. Like
Right.
it wasn't really known that that was a thing that autistic kids did until I think later on when they started interviewing more autistic parents and really talking about the ways that autistic kids interact with books, like you said, the way that we read them and the types of things that we read. And so I think it was hearing all these stories that made me think about the way that I interact with
Mm-hmm.
books, both as a kid and as an adult. I can get lost in reading Wikipedia, which I know is a common thing for everyone, but especially neurodivergent folks, I feel like we love that kind of stuff. Like my husband has ADHD, and he'll just tell you all kinds of facts about his favorite video game and stuff. So it's definitely the way that autistic kids interact with information, I think, is something that I love talking about, and I don't feel like a lot of the other people talk about, but it is fascinating to look at the ways that those kids like those things. And maybe, like you said, it'll help other people like me get diagnosed to realize that, yeah, the way I interact with this medium is a very autistic way of thinking and
Right.
interacting.
Yeah, that was fascinating. That was something I hadn't heard, and I don't know if you were able to see the comments. I know it's hard to look at them when you're also talking,
Yeah,
but
it's
we've
hard
gotten
to
really nice
see.
comments and somebody saying how what an inspiration you are, and she can't wait to hold your books. Um, and
Oh, yay.
and you've talked about how, well, I'm also looking at time because I want to be respectful of your time. I have one more question, and then maybe you can give us a little preview about what your books are going to be about. But you've talked about when you were a child that you learned how to socialize through stories and through books. Can you talk about how stories and books are important for autistic kids and learning these kind of like how to interact with the world, especially with non-autistic people?
Yeah, definitely. As a special education teacher, we did get kind of these social stories that we could use to work with kids, kind of a this is how you go to the library,
Mm,
sort of this recipe almost of, you go to the library and you get a book and you take it to the librarian. And that kind of stuff can also be extended to like the social thing. You say
mhm,
hello, you say how are you, and for me, as a autistic kid before all of that, not having access to those kinds of things, I kind of learned things through stories, through books, because I would read about how someone would say hi, and then the other person would say hi, and then they would say, how are you? And
mhm.
I'm good, thanks. And over time, I learned that you're supposed to just say, I'm good, thanks, and, not go into this whole spiel about how your day has been horrible. Like most people just want to, acknowledge you and move on.
Right.
And so for me, books were a way for me to see like how a neurotypical brain works. I didn't
Mm,
quite understand why it worked that way, but I saw that other people tended to talk in a certain way. So I learned to copy that and copy the different types of things that kids said. And I feel like it can be, an important learning tool for neurodivergent kids and autistic kids to see what a conversation looks like. But on the other hand, it's also good if for the reverse to be true for
right.
neurotypical kids to read books about autistic characters
Mhm,
and see that just because we're not looking at you doesn't mean we're not listening. And
right.
we communicate in a little bit of a different way, but we're still interested in you and stuff like that. So it's it's kind of this complicated, fascinating thing. But yeah, just to boil it down to the essence of it, books are great because they do give you that peek into someone's brain that you don't really get from like a TV show or a movie unless it really dives into, you know, their inner monologue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really great tool, I think, for everyone. And that's why books are, you know, what we use to learn empathy about each other. So I hope that we can definitely get more books that can be used for that, for autistic and non-autistic kids to learn more about each other.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, about how books are a different tool than like a movie or a TV
Mhm.
show, because you really are getting the inner monologue or inner
Yeah.
dialogue. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating. I hadn't thought about that. And speaking of children's books that we need to have more of, can you give us a little preview, and then I'll let you go back to work? Of
Yeah, yeah,
because you said book
definitely.
plural. I
Um,
guess I didn't realize so you have more than one that you're working on.
yeah, so just to, I guess, briefly touch on the way like picture book manuscripts work, like it's a little different. Like when you write a novel, you usually go and take that one novel to an agent and say,
Mhm.
okay, here it is, let's get this published. When it comes to picture books, since they're a lot shorter, you'll usually want to go to an agent with like 3 different ideas. So
Oh,
you could say, you know, here's 3 books that we can publish, and it's they kind of want to see your range of things that you want to write about.
mhm.
So for me, I don't have any of them on me to grab, but I can at least tell you what they all are about. I do have one that's about an autistic girl with a rock collection, and she has
Mhm.
like her favorite rock in the entire world, and a classmate accidentally breaks it. And it's, you know, of course, the most awful thing ever. And it becomes this moment for her of, you know, just like absolute like shock and terror. Like, you know, it's hard for autistic kids to share. And so I think this book, it kind of like touches on a bunch of stuff where this is a kid with a special interest in rocks. You know, she has her favorite thing. She doesn't want to share. She's encouraged to share and it goes badly, you know, and how can the other kids make it right? So it's a little bit of that social emotional stuff as well, but hopefully not so didactic that it becomes like a social story.
Right.
But that's something that's one of the stories I'm writing, or I've written, I mean, and I love it because I love rocks. And then I also have another one that is based on myself and a friend of mine, who would read the phone book. I read encyclopedias and he read the phone book as a kid. And so that book is about a couple of kids who read in a different way, different types of stories, and they learn kind of about the other kid and what their thing is. You know, one kid likes numbers, the other one likes words, and so that one is wonderful. And I love that story because it has more than one autistic character, which is usually not something you see in
Mhm.
these kinds of books. It's usually, you know, the mainstream neurotypical kid, the normal kid dealing with the autistic kid.
Mhm.
But I love books like I forget her name now. It's The Many Mysteries of the Finkel Family,
Mhm.
is the name of the book. It's a middle grade novel, and I love it. It's by Sarah Caput. I love it because it has 2 autistic siblings, and I feel like we don't get enough of that in
Right.
books, and I love that.
You're getting a lot of
um,
great comments. Thank you, Nadine, for these comments. She's saying how much she loves the ideas and that we need these books.
Yay!
Yes.
Hi, Nadine. But yes, definitely. So those are 2 of at least the 3 or so that I've been working on. I have a
Mhm.
few more, but they escape me right now in all the excitement. But those 2 are my favorite ones, because it does touch on some very autistic things, like, you know, the reading encyclopedias and the rock collection and stuff. So those are the kinds of stories that I'm trying to get published to, you know, kind of give everyone a better idea of what autism looks like beyond just the usual stuff that we see in kids' books. So fingers crossed they'll be on shelves soon in a few years. So
Yes. Well, I can't wait. Then we'll have to have you back on to talk about them.
yes, definitely. I'll have to come back for a return interview to talk about the process of getting there and getting them out.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so
Mhm.
much for joining us. This is such a great conversation. I've been looking forward to it. So thank you for
Yes, thank
taking the
you.
time. And so somebody was asking that they missed part of the conversation about whether you had written these books. She has written the books and working on getting them published. So we should see them hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I was just going to add, if you do want to find some books that are published right now by autistic authors, definitely go to my website, because I am always trying to share other books, picture books, middle grade, YA. Oh, sorry about that. That's the bell. Definitely check out my website if you're looking for book recommendations, and that'll also be where you can find out when my books do get published.
Yes, check out her website, and she has written a post for our website, the MCBD website, that will be coming out in next month, which is Autism Acceptance Month. So look for that as well. You can, if you're following our feed, we'll make sure to publicize that once it's published. Thank you, everybody. So great to talk with you, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. It was great.
Bye.
Bye.